Hello parents and professionals, and today I am going to be teaching you how to teach your young people to be more resilient. So if you are looking for your young people to become a bit braver, a bit tougher, a bit stronger in challenging situations, then I've got a really good tip for you, so just keep on watching. When I was growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and one of the benefits of having spent so much time with them was I got to hear about all of their really interesting war stories. So when they were growing up, my grandparents were evacuee children, and they were kind of ripped from their families and sent halfway across the country to live with people that they did not know in circumstances that were far from ideal. And my nan's family in particular were a really big family, so she was separated from her siblings and made a few escape attempts, made her way across the country on the train by herself, all sorts of crazy things. Later on, my granddad actually became a firefighter during the war, and he was responsible for putting out the fires that would get started when a pin was pulled from a grenade. It would have a spark on it, and that would often set fires. And the fires were just as devastating at times as some of the bombs themselves. So I have all of these great stories that my grandparents told me over the years. And one of the benefits of hearing about the challenges that they went through is it, on an unconscious level, really helped to teach me that I'm from a strong family, and that with any luck, I've inherited some of that strong stuff that they have. In fact, what it really teaches you is that you have the ability to overcome all sorts of different challenges, the likes of which you will probably never have to experience in your lifetime. But if you ever had to, or experience anything like it, you know that you've got the DNA within you to be able to do it. And that's why my suggestion for you, as just one of the many things that you can do to help a young person to build resilience, is to look back on your history. And if you are a parent, a guardian, a grandparent who's watching this right now, really think about your family history. The stuff that's appropriate, obviously, that's been challenging over the years, that will really resonate with the young people that you're talking to, because maybe it's a story about you, maybe it's a story about an aunt or an uncle that they know. And being able to hear how people have overcome adversity is one thing. Being able to hear about how people you know well have overcome adversity is a whole other level of inspiration. And it really helps to encourage those young people to think about the fact that they are made of that same genetic makeup. If your relatives could have gone through difficult times, then at times, so will you, and so can you. You've got all the juice within you to make it possible to succeed in those circumstances. I think for the generation that came after my grandparents, so my parents' generation, so like many of you watching, you may have parents who are now between their sort of 60s and maybe 80s, so that would be where roughly my parents would have been. If I think about the sorts of trials and challenges that my parents went through, it was nothing really compared to my grandparents. The challenges that they went through were much more local. You know, they were incidents and challenges that actually occurred to them personally, rather than living through something that was affecting a whole nation, a whole country, or the whole world, like World War II. But even so, there are going to be some useful and interesting lessons that come from the generation next. I wonder if one day in the future we'll be using stories of lockdown to talk about the great lockdown that we all went through and how we managed to survive, but probably ate a few too many biscuits. That may be the case, but it's important to find stories of inspiration wherever you can, and all of those ones that relate to someone that you know just carry an extra deep meaning with them. In fact, there may be those more personalised challenges that don't necessarily relate to an emotional situation, but really just are about a practical set of circumstances. For example, many people, when they are going through early relationships, starting with their young family, go through financial challenges. And those financial challenges can cause you to be really super creative. You know, I remember my parents talking about the time when all they could afford was baked beans or making tuna pasta bake. That was all they had the money for. And how they were able to live off of really small amounts but got really creative with the ways in which they did it. My aunt is someone who's really good at being quite thrifty and repurposing stuff or decorating things in a way that look very cool, but she'd use all sorts of odds and ends to create the desired effect and the finishing piece. Being able to get good at things like knitting and crochet because you couldn't afford jumpers. You know, all of those are stories that tell us when you get stuck, there's going to be a workaround. You just have to be perseverant enough. You just have to persevere enough. You have to persevere enough to be able to work your way through it. These are useful messages for young people to hear, whether it is difficult times in history that we've been through, difficult times in our family that we've been through, difficult financial difficulties that we have experienced. One of the stories that I remember my grandparents sharing with me was when they went to visit some other relatives down in Dorset, and they unfortunately had a car accident on the way. Now, it wasn't a very serious car accident, but it did finish off the car, and they found themselves stuck somewhere between where they lived in Hemel Hempstead and Dorset, and there were no mobile phones back then. There wasn't even really any pay phones on the road that they were on. And it was only as a result of making friends with strangers that they were able to muddle their way through, get a lift to where they needed to go to, and get themselves back on the right track. You know, it was probably a really challenging day when that happened, but they got through it and they lived to tell the tale. And all of these sorts of things let our young people know you'll find a way. You can probably problem solve your way through many things in life if you are open to the idea that you won't always get what you want straight away. You won't always have the ideal solution, but you can muddle through. If we want young people to be resilient, then we need to let them know that they come from a resilient place, that they come from a breed of people who came before them who have always been resilient, and letting them know that this is something that is already in their genetic code gives them the message that they really don't need to panic and worry quite as much as they otherwise would have done about all of the what ifs that could go horribly wrong if they were to do or not do whatever that worrying thing is that's playing on their mind. And the other thing I would add in to this advice is the tone with which you explain the story, or the way in which you reflect upon it now. Some of the difficulties that families go through over the years really are very challenging indeed. But if you're able to retell that story yourself in a way that puts the positive spin on it, or maybe even makes aspects of the chaos of it really quite funny, then that brings with it a whole other level of understanding around what it is to be resilient. Suddenly, resilience isn't something that's like a constipated experience that you need to force out of yourself, even though you don't really want to have to do it. Instead, resilience becomes something that is easy and natural, and maybe even that problem-solving aspect of it can be quite fun or interesting or exciting. Maybe we can go at things with a little bit of curiosity. The memories that I have of my grandparents talking about what they went through during the war aren't nearly as terrifying as I'm sure the war actually was. In fact, my nan made the stories of being an evacuee sound like quite a big adventure, even the bits where she ended up hating it and running away. And my granddad made the bits of being in the fire service sound like an amazing, thrilling experience with lots of camaraderie involved. And in a way, there was a lot of the way in which my grandparents talked about the war that made it sound like quite a bonding, connecting experience between her and, you know, everybody around them. I think people were really very conscious of taking care of each other in a time like that. And so that's the main message that I picked up in the challenging stories that she shared. When I think about my parents or my aunt telling me about the ways in which they scraped through with absolutely no money whatsoever to their names, especially when they were doing things like attempting to buy houses or decorate their first property, it makes me think of how creative they were and curious they were about doing things. I remember my parents saying that they didn't have enough money to, you know, buy alcohol and have a good time anymore. So they made their own. And my mum and dad had these demijohns for filtering the alcohol through. And I think they'd made cider and it did not go well. And so they buried these demijohns filled with this dodgy alcohol in my grandparents' garden, up the back of their garden. And they exploded in the middle of the night. So my poor grandparents, who'd gone through the war, suddenly had explosions going off in their garden during peacetime Europe, and we're not entirely sure why. And it was because my parents had made a really bad batch of dodgy cider. So things like that make me think that, you know, yes, they were scraping by and they didn't have the money to buy the things they wanted to buy and they couldn't have a good time anymore. But actually, it sounds like they had some fun in other ways. So if you can put those sorts of slants on the histories that you're explaining, resilience doesn't have to be all about feeling discomfort. Actually, stories around resilience can oftentimes be inspiring, they can be positive, and they can be about developing curiosity and a sense of power within yourself, taking control of your circumstances. So I want you to think about how it is that you can influence the young people in your life with history, especially their personal histories and the histories of those around them. You know, some of their own circumstances from when they were tiny babies. Maybe they were in the special care baby unit, but they fought for their right to live. Maybe they didn't walk for ages. Maybe they didn't speak for ages. You can tell them how they overcame those adversities and tell them in a way that doesn't just make them feel good about themselves, but also carries with it, you know, some interesting, funny aspects. There will be things inevitably from their own histories. You know, you can tell them about the time that they got so mad at themselves because they couldn't take their first steps, or the time when they kept stumbling over a really specific word that they wanted to say but couldn't say. Things like that are easy, comfortable ways to embed that message of you are made of strong stuff, you can persevere, and you can make those stories not just interesting but quite funny as well. And then that developing of resilience becomes something that is an enjoyable thing to have to go through, and not just something that we're all straining to become stronger and tougher, but instead it's actually, you know, it's freer, it's got a freer feeling to it. We are curious, we're learning, we're developing, we're finding a way forward in the world. And that's all resilience building stuff as well. So go think, how can we use our history to make the future brighter and stronger? And that is everything for today. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, make sure you go ahead and click the red subscribe button, hit the notifications bell so that you get notified the next time I upload a video like this. Give it a thumbs up, and I will see you all on the next one. Bye!